Before my film partner and I began essentially 6 years of pre-production work on Revisiting Utopia, I had never heard the word utopia used to describe Park Forest, and I certainly never thought Park Forest was the perfect place to grow up, racially or otherwise. But I did experience a harmony in race relations that I have experienced no place else, and I was absolutely curious to see if that was the case among my fellow Park Forest residents. After finally beginning production, our film team took nearly 6 years to finish the project. The journey began in 2020, a few weeks after the murder of George Floyd. In the months that followed, our team encountered obstacles from people who were incredulous of the story of Park Forest, and in some cases told us a white director simply had no business making the film. In one case, the white son-in-law of a civil rights icon told us our basic story was, quote, the biggest load of bullshit I've ever heard in my life. That's what white people tell each other to feel good about themselves, end quote. Our team of different races and genders was fluid for the first couple years, with various members coming and going. In about 2023, our team of 2 white men, 2 black men, and 1 white woman, 3 who grew up in Park Forest and 2 who did not, solidified into the final authority overseeing content. We debated dozens of content issues and questions about race, and eventually accepted producer John Moore's definition of our ethos. This is not a black or white film. This is a black and white film. By that time, several team members had left amid debates about how the story should be told. In particular, whether or not, as director, I should go on camera to tell it. Our team ultimately agreed to let the film's characters speak for themselves and use a narrator to fill in the important gaps. By then, my partner, founding co-director David Narter, who came up with the idea of telling the story, had resigned because he believed the characters were, quote, sugar-quoting, end quote, their memories. The following interview attempts to capture that story.
I went to Drake University in Des Moines. I was walking on the sidewalk. I probably told you this story. And there was some North Shore. I was walking out with some North Shore girl. And as we're walking, all of a sudden she just grabs my arm really tight and gets really close to me. And I was like, what's that about? She's like, oh, well, that black guy was walking by us. And I was like, what? And it had never even crossed my mind that someone would have that kind of reaction to other people. That seemed like such a weird thing to me. And then in discussing things with other friends, I remember when Trudy Williams went to school. She was a really good friend of mine, and she went to Northwestern. And she told me before she went to Northwestern that the African American students needed to have an extra week. They had to get there 1 week early to acclimate themselves through all these activities to basically the racism they'd be receiving. And those things really blew my mind. And I knew that racism existed, but I had no idea the impact it had on other people and the ways that it existed elsewhere. And it seemed cartoonish to me, is what it was. And that built this mythology for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people, where it was like, it was a different world when you weren't there. And it seemed while we were there that it was a perfect place from the perspective of race. That did not seem to be an issue. The way I had remembered it was that people traveled in circles that were not really defined by race. Every time there was a Laquan McDonald, anytime that there was really horrible race-incited violence, I would come back to that place. And I think it would build the mythology up even greater for me as well, or the nostalgia, or however you want to refer to it. So I began to think, man, the world needs to know about this perfect place. And that's what it felt like. And every time I'd reach out to you and say, first it was, we need to write a book. Then it was, we need to do an article. Then it was, we need to do a podcast. And finally it was like, we need to do a documentary. and that was the last time. That was during the George Floyd stuff. is calling you up and going, okay, here we go again. As you said, you pick up the phone, it's like, here we go again. And there were protests and riots as a result of that, and there was violence as a result of that. And Gina posted, am I crazy? I feel like we grew up in Utopia, and
Was it as good for the black kids as it was for us, or am I mistaken? I'm
yeah.
I'm embarrassed, yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So what was I wrong about this? And people were like, no, it was Utopia. And then somebody chimes in, and I think it was Gerald Davis's little brother. And he says, no, you know what? It was great, but it was not Utopia. It wasn't the same for all of us. And it really blew my mind because he lived down the street from me. And I was friends with Daryl. So it made me rethink this, wow, maybe other people's experiences weren't the same as my experiences, which is kind of a sad thought to have. And then immediately, that post was jumped on by so many people who were saying, you know, why do you have to put down something that's so great? You know, there's always people that are always going to say that things that are great are not so great. And the argument that ensued as a result of that really blew my mind. It made me think.
There were like over 200 comments.
Yeah. And it became a debate about people's memories. And I thought, wow, this is a lot more complex than the place we grew up with was perfect and people need to know about it. It ended up being, was it the same experience for other people? Do people, for me, I started to wonder, do people hang on to their memories? And why is it that people are so defensive about their own past and their own perceptions of what they remembered? And I started to get really tied up in that notion. And I think while that was happening, you were going through something else entirely. And that's when it's weird. We came at this from the exact same place, and almost from that day, we exploded in different directions, but we were both really motivated to tell a story, but it started to really diverge from that point on. But I think both of us are devoted to research and understanding the story, and it was interesting how our perceptions of what we began to encounter went through the exact same process, where we both got very defensive about what we were finding and how we were understanding it. And I think that fueled us, but eventually became, as you said, we're making two different movies now. And I think that's the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, you were the first to define it, and I was like, that is what's going on here. We're making two different movies.
Let me back up for a second. I wanted to say what I remember about you reaching out to me to do the film.
Yeah.
We met here, and you said, let's write a book. And I was working for the Sun-Times at the time, and I just started doing Videolicious videos.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh, no, let's do a documentary, you know?
Yeah.
And everyone had just started using iPhones for video and stuff, you know? And also I was like, I guess I didn't want to write a book as a journalist. I don't know why, but yeah. So yeah, and we went back and forth for like a couple of years. And they kept having the police shootings, man. And as the news kept getting hotter, you know, I remember we kept saying, okay, well let's look into this more, you know. And I went to this African American history panel in Park Forest.
I remember.
Yeah.
Okay, I remember you calling me, and you like left me a huge message. You're like, Dave, you were so excited about it.
You don't have that message anymore, do you?
I'll bet I do.
Check, man.
Okay.
Yeah, it could be good.
It was so stunning. I mean, I didn't have to ask a single question. I just sat and watched, and they outlined everything that we assumed was true. This one panelist was older, and her kids are probably older too enough, but she said they both went to medical school. She's African American, and she said she was surprised. They both wrote one of their entrance essays about the utopia they grew up in Park Forest. And then I spoke with a lot of the people my age afterwards. Well, there were 3 people there, African Americans, and they said, you know, absolutely. As soon as they left Park Forest, it was like the multiverse.
And so in the panel, Myrtle Martin tells this story about her 2 sons writing their college and they had to write an essay. And they both called their childhood in Park Forest utopian.
Yeah.
And that's why I was like, oh my God,
That's
maybe
crazy.
maybe we are onto something. Yeah. But we didn't even get started after that. We still stalled. And then after George Floyd, I
That's
think
what it
you
was.
texted me and said, here we are again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I texted back, let's do it. And you went out and bought cameras and we started doing interviews. We started to do research, and you went to the Historical Society, and we had heard about the list of the black families, but you found it.
Seeing that list,
and you took pictures of it. Yeah. And I remember we were both very unnerved. I think you were a little more unnerved. Can you tell me what you were thinking then?
Yeah, when I first saw that thing, our first thought, I think you and I talked about that list as if it were a historical document. And with that kind of, with the positive connotation that comes with that. But when I saw it, my first thought was, oh, I think I know what this is, and it's not. It felt insidious to me. It felt like, I initially got the thought, if I were on this list, I would feel, it felt like a list of, I don't know, it felt like it was keeping track of something rather than a document celebrating something. And I think I always thought of it in those terms, and then as soon as I saw the list, I was like, ooh, I don't feel so good about this anymore. And it was interesting because that became a question that from that point on we asked, and we're really careful, and you asked about really carefully. I remember you saying, how do you feel about being on that list? Who was the third person that we interviewed? That woman who had the smaller house.
Yeah, Vivian Purnell.
Vivian, yeah. And she said, oh, I don't mind it so much. And that really made me feel weird. Somebody saying, oh, I don't mind it so much, made it seem as if I don't mind my racist neighbor, or I don't mind that people kick over my trash cans at night. I was like, oh, you do mind it.
Yeah. Do you remember what Myrtle said about it? She actually said without the list, they would never have been able to bring us in. And then we also learned about the elaborate plan to allow black people to move in, putting police cars outside their house.
Right.
And I remember you used the word that you were sickened. Or something like that. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it was very disturbing. I was unnerved too.
Well, it's funny because that story has two sides to it. And I think both of us, just because of our personalities and because we had a dynamic that was pushing us along, which was based on a lot of tension, I thought, that dynamic became, okay, there are two ways you can look at police protection. Isn't it awesome that they provided police protection? Isn't it horrible that they needed police protection? At that point, then we started going down two different trails at that point. And that's where a lot of the tension that probably is really good for the movie helped, but it eventually reached a point where we couldn't go.
I saw this as a journalist, and I thought whatever we find and we use.
Yeah.
But I think you were already like, this isn't what I thought it was, And tell me if I'm correct.
That's exactly right.
And so I don't want to do a story about, this is what I heard from you,
Yeah.
A story about something that I don't think is good necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I didn't want to paint something good that I felt bad about. And it's a shame because I didn't want to feel bad about it either because there were so many good things in it as well. I felt so bad because I was saying to a journalist, I don't think you're covering the story. I don't think you're following the story. And that's about the worst thing you can say to somebody. And I felt awful about that. And
I don't remember you saying that.
I didn't. What I'm saying is that I knew that that's what my messaging was starting to become. And that made you mad. And so we went on a really bad spiral there toward the end.
Yes.
But
I remember we collected stories of incidents of racism.
We did.
Yeah, I remember the Craig Hodges story really surprised me that he found a note in his locker with the N-word on the piece of paper. Yeah, stuff like that.
But I also remember, the stories that I found most fascinating. The thing I found most fascinating was the time we were talking to Stanisiak and
Ken King.
And Kenny King. And Kenny King told that story about when he says, I wanted to say horrible things. or he said, I wanted to find something horrible, and I just couldn't. And it was just so perfect. And then right there on the spot is when he came up with, you know what? We never went to the same parties, and pulled it all together. And it was really interesting because Pete came into the interview saying, it wasn't so perfect. I mean, they really had the opposite roles that we expected. And then Kenny came to that realization, and I was like, that's the story I want to tell. The story about memory. The story about how we make something what we want it to be rather than what it is, and how we hold so closely and protect that so closely. Yeah. And that wasn't the story necessarily that we were going down. And I remember you said to me at that point, you're like, the story you want to tell is going to be so much harder, and we don't have the money and the resources and the time to tell that story. And because I started to ask you about, I'm like, let's talk to cognitive scientists, and you're like, what? What are you talking about?
So yeah, that's funny. That it's interesting though, because that party thing haunted me. When he pointed to me and he said, I didn't go to your parties, and he pointed to Pete and said, I didn't go to your parties, And I don't know if you remember, but I brought up, it occurred to me that they were both athletes,
Yeah.
And for Pete, it had a lot to do with, he didn't go out on the night before a game,
Yeah.
But Kenny did hang around with the black kids. And so that became a theme of the interviews, especially after you left, I think, which was we found people, some things did shift. The storyline that I think we found was that, maybe the apex of all this was 1986 or something. That's what Greg Davis ended up saying.
Yeah.
But so and we interviewed Ryan Causey, who was the most critical of anybody we interviewed.
Really?
And he said he explained the hardships he went through.
Yeah.
And then he said, I remember getting invited to the parties finally at the Bannon's house. My cousins.
Really?
And he said, and after that it was okay. So there was something to do with that socialization.
Yeah.
And then in the I talked to the kids from the mid '80s, and they went to they all were interracial constantly, and they went to parties in Beacon Hill, and so
it really was like you say, like it's this very brief moment.
Yeah, and I followed up that Kenny line to the best I could, which was Chip Willis we interviewed, and he said, he called it an anomaly. He said, I don't know, I remember what you're saying, that the black guys hung around with the black guys.
Yeah.
And so that's it. That's part of the story. Yeah. But I also remember, you came to your own. You were being honest with yourself. You said, I want to do this story, and you told me I want to interview experts about race, and I want to do, and I wanted to make the film and about memory.
Yeah.
And do you remember that you said you reached out to people to try to figure out how to do that? Can you talk about that, or do you want me to remind you?
Yeah, remind me.
Okay,
I
you
don't
said
remember.
that you talked to some film people, and they said, well, if you wanted to test that angle.
I ended up contacting a guy who had been making documentaries for PBS. I don't know the conclusion. What's the conclusion that he came to? What did he say? What do you remember? Because I remember him just telling me, he's like, you're not going to be able to do this.
He said in order to tell that story, you'd have to follow people around for 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. So I ended up getting a hold of the guy from PBS.
I mean, I didn't want to do that, but you were like, we can't do that. But that would be a good test of the memory thesis.
Yeah.
I feel like I want to talk about my own anger.
Talk about it.
And I think what I felt disturbed about was I think that I felt that you were interpreting my anger about our divergent paths because I wanted to hang on to the original idea that it was utopia, and my anger was more about that we were gonna somehow not tell the story of the facts because we wanted to make a statement about the film. And so as a journalist, or a statement, about the town and racism in general. Yeah. It's funny, I remember a classmate of ours, when I told him about the film, he's like, Park Forest didn't solve racism. And I thought, that's what you think I'm trying to do? So, we were definitely
But that was right.
What I was about to say here that I never articulated later in the interview is that my intention in making the film was to simply collect information from the people we interviewed and present it to viewers and let them decide what to make of it. As a journalist, I did not intend to make a statement or build a case about the information. much less suggest that Park Forest had somehow found the solution to racism. The story turned out to be extremely complex, and for some folks, the narrative was suspect, if not fraudulent, once racism was exposed.
But you know what? That's the cliff on this movie, right? That is the cliff, and I think fearing that, especially when fearing that ended up being somewhat motivational for me, but I think it also created a rift between us sometimes because I'd be like, I think you already fell off the edge.
As a journalist, it was easy for me to listen to people's stories with the intention of ultimately presenting them, as they were told to me during production, in the final version of the film. This is how I was trained, and the career I pursued for much of the last 40 years. For me, both the positive and the negative are the story. There was no need to decide one way or another what was right and what was wrong.
But that stayed with me and that resonated with me, and I think that ended up, I mean, that really marred a lot of stuff for me, because then when something was cast by somebody in a positive light, I could always see the negative. When the policeman paints the fence white because the neighbors painted it black, I only focused on the neighbors painting it black. And I'm like, this story is not what I thought it was. Whereas the policeman painting it white is also a really good story. And we would go back and forth on that. There were, and I saw that happen to you as well, and it was, you were just as shifty. You were just as shifty with your position. You called me up after we interviewed Ray and said, and I think I was wrong. You called me up after watching that dark, scary 80s interview with the mayor. What the heck? What's his name? And you called me up and you said, "Oh, I was wrong."
During the reporting of a story, when I say I was wrong, I mean that I did not hear what I expected, not that I was wrong about whether the story was good or bad. In the case of Ray Miles, I was shocked to hear that he had been thrown into lockers. For me, being wrong meant the story was going to be even better because it had become more complicated.
And every so often, those things would happen, and I'd be like, "Oh, okay." You know, and of course, just like any good tense relationship, I'd then take the other side. And I'd be like, "Well, no, it wasn't that bad, man." And the one thing that I wanted to see, and I don't know if you ended up doing this after I left, but the one place where I was like, why aren't we interviewing the people who didn't stay? Because for me, this became a film about identity. This became about how people perceive themselves and how they perceive their own life story. And it seemed to me for the people who were on the list who stayed, their identity was so closely tied to the success and beauty of that story. And there is success and beauty in that story regardless. Did you end up talking to people that left?
Yes, a handful. It was hard to find, and we asked...
For obvious reasons,
We asked people, black people from Park Forest, to say, do you remember any?
Yeah.
Very few remembered. We did talk to the first family, and they left, and they had a hard time, but they didn't leave. They didn't leave because of that, according to them.
And the harder I pull, the worse this situation's going to be.
Harder I pulled.
Yeah.
And I regret that. I think what happened when I had that outburst by email.
What about the one by phone?
I don't remember that.
Yeah.
But I felt like I took your fire. You stopped fighting, and you were like, "Here's what I want it to be," and we can't do it. So I regret that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I think in the end you ended up. You know, we had to allow each other. Again, it's really hard to do that. It's like
there aren't a lot of co-directors on things, by the way.
Exactly. It's like we both decided to go into a ride in Disney World, and we're like, when we come out, we're going to tell the same story, right? And there's no possible way that that's going to happen.
Yep.
And I think we set ourselves up for failure in that. And I think a lot of it was also because we were so on the same page when we started.
Yes.
And that started to pull
And we
us.
got stunned by a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, the interview with Dinerstein, when I watched it, I
that
was
phone call from
I
you.
was blown. I just was like, he is talking so matter of factly about it. It's like it wasn't important. But what happened was, I went back and watched that 3 or 4 times, and I could see he was being very technical and specific.
Yeah.
And he just, I saw it differently. I didn't think it was a lack of belief in it. I think he believed very strongly.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, but I just couldn't see it.
I think he was stunned.
Yeah.
I mean, he said he was.
Deeper into that interview, he
Yeah.
explains that the people in Park Forest did not want integration. There's a long history that we researched since then.
Yeah.
But the Human Relations Commission was pushing for it. The village board passed some measure that made sure that anything the Human Relations Commission, any action they took wouldn't be enacted without the approval of the village board.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a long climb, and the guy who bought the house ended up buying it from a member of the Human Relations Commission because the realtors wouldn't sell to black people. So it's really complicated. Yeah. The other thing I was going to say is, I asked, a number of black people about all those practices. Most of them said that it made it work. And here was the other thing.
How does it make it work?
So the practice of integration maintenance was basically steering buyers to the opposite race neighborhoods.
Right.
And so I've repeated that exact question
Yeah.
to several people we interviewed, which was, William Simpson said, what's wrong with black people living next door to each other? What's wrong with an all-black neighborhood? And most people did respond in defense of the village policy. I said to Greg Davis, so there was racism. It failed. Didn't it fail? And he said, no, failure is not trying. Failure is, And basically a lot of people, one of the ways I got right-sized about all this was, black people know there's going to be racism. Just because that we had, this utopia, we know that there's going to be a handful of people who are going to, the Joe Zake story, I was just like, what? Yeah, in Park Forest in 1979, Yeah.
Joe Zake, an executive producer of the film, said he attended a kegger party in the late 1970s in which the white father of the host used a racial slur to order all the black teens to leave.
And I think that is the difference between you and me, because for me, I was so disheartened by stories like that. I was just like that shows me not as strong as some of those people who really were. I was so glad that my son got to meet so many of those people. And really, I mean, honestly, that's the best thing that came out of this from day one. I was like, I am so glad.
I remember when you asked Adonis to tell Jared, what was great about it.
Yeah. And that was really cool. But then when Adonis would tell the story about some girl whose parents told him not to date him, I was like, oh, damn it. And every time that happened, like, I just wanted to crumple up, like if it were on a piece of paper, I just crumple it up and throw it away. And that made me, and I couldn't recover from that stuff, and I think you could, and I think you could, and I don't know if it's journalistic distance, if it was, I'm hanging on to this story, but you and I couldn't be in the same place anymore on that. And that was so disappointing, because we both wanted to tell a story, and I think at the end we wanted to tell the same story, but we couldn't agree on what we thought about it at any given time.
Yeah, I think it was two different movies. I think if you're going to have commentary on whether the story was authentic or what we thought it was or not, or if memory was being somehow tainted by time, that's a different film. That might be a good follow-up film. Well, I think I told you that before.
Yeah, because I do remember I called you up after watching the Michael Jackson documentary where they had interviewed all of these kids, and these kids had these memories, and they were like, I really loved it, even though he looked at my butthole. I loved it. It was a wonderful life. I was like, not to make that a good analogy for this, but in many respects, I was like, yeah, a lot of times, like, we cling to something and somebody can say, oh yeah, it was horrible. And we're like, oh yeah, it was horrible. However, my grandfather was a horrible racist, and he was horrible to people. Not my grandfather, but this hypothetical grandfather.
Yeah.
He was a horrible racist, and he used to shoot squirrels. But he was my grandfather. And I'm like, for me, I can get so cynical about a story like that and not want to involve myself. And I don't think that, for me, that disqualified everything.
Yep.
I was very quick to disqualify, and you were not. But in having those conversations, again, I was implicitly saying to you, you're a bad journalist. And that's not a good way to be friends.
Yeah.
Say, you know how you identify yourself? Because this is all about identity. That's fucked up too. You're not right. And, and this story became, for both of us, about our own identities, about our own memories, about what we think is important in our own lives and how we tell our own stories, about us in the past and in the present.
Yeah.
And the fact that we couldn't agree on that, which is the very same thing that we're documenting.
We weren't prepared for this to unfold the way it did.
Yeah. It shook me pretty bad. And it made me, and here's the thing, you came from an idyllic childhood, and I came from a really rough, bad childhood.
Yeah.
And ended up in Park Forest. And I knew when I went back as a high schooler, I was like, oh my God, this place is amazing. James Cotton came over to my house that day school started. He walked me to 8th grade, which is the middle 8th grade. He walked me down the street to Westwood on Winona. And I was like, this place is great. Because I was living in townhouses in the northwest suburbs, and everybody was so mean and angry all the time. I was like, this is the best place. And then he's like, you got to come to Canteen on Friday. And we all went to Canteen. I'm like, I am living in paradise. And it really changed my whole life. I was depressed and everything before that. And it was 4 amazing years of my life. And then I had built up a mythology around that I had told my children, that I had told all of my friends. And I found out right away, oh no, you were actually wrong about this, Dave. James Cotton's great. And Eric's great. And the Davises are great. And Trudy Williams is the most wonderful person in the world. Nakua is wonderful. But you know what? It wasn't what you thought it was. And I have always been quick to say, yeah, I'll disabuse you of that nonsense right away.
Sorry.
And, and because that was my life. I was like, I had a really horrible childhood at that point. And then growing up, for those 4 years, it was so amazing. And I had such a good time that it was like, oh yeah, this crap too,
I watched the Gina interview again recently, and we didn't realize it, but she said it right then. The third or fourth interview, and she said they didn't tell us about, the black kids did not tell us what they were experiencing. Yeah. Maybe they didn't feel comfortable. I mean, in some ways, that's hard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought. So let's take it like somebody like Trudy Williams, who I have not spoken to since high school ended. I felt like she was one of my 2 or 3 best friends in high school. And I thought, do you see how when we go to college, we fall into our silos? And college at that point put you in those silos too. I mean, there's a lot of that. And then you go into economic silos afterwards. And I thought society broke up something beautiful. And what I started to realize through the movie is, maybe it wasn't there the way I remember it, and maybe Trudy didn't feel the same way about me the way that I felt about her, because she knew that in the end, I might have been very racist toward her, toward Daryl, toward James, toward everybody that I felt I was really good friends with. And in the end, I certainly behaved that way because I didn't keep in touch with them.
White people have applied themselves more than maybe ever in our history after the George Floyd stuff to look at their privilege,
try and adjust their
and that kind of analysis. And then there's been diversity classes and training and stuff. I'll just say what I think. I found like an experience like Park Forest is more successful at opening doors than that stuff.
For sure. I think that's true. I think, because we were kids, and when you're kids, especially in high school and in junior high, even more, where it's such an ugly world, again, I was taken by how nice everybody was. And I was amazed how easy it was to move around between people, I remember like Michael Shaw and I did not get along, and we wrestled each other in class. I was like, I can't wait to wrestle this guy, and he couldn't wait to wrestle me, and we fished around each other forever, just wiggling free, and nothing happening. But I don't remember at any point it feeling like a race issue.
That's what always surprised me, the number of people who's talked about fights and stuff and said it wasn't racial.
Yeah.
Which I find hard to believe.
But if I'm Michael Shaw, I might feel differently about that. And that is the thing that I came to realize in doing this film, was that just because I didn't feel it didn't mean it wasn't there, or that it didn't exist in some way that other people experienced. The one takeaway that blew me away really was that Trudy thing, where I felt like, because I even reached out for her for the film, and she was like, why? Why do you want to talk to me? And I was like, I thought we were really good friends. And I realized, you know what? My experience was not somebody else's experience. And that seems like such a basic thing that you tell a child. But I think that, and again, I think I was overwhelmed with a story that was happening to us that you can't help but have happen to you in that, in this experience of reliving the past. It's really hard to do that. And the thing is though, it's also this childish notion that, here's what I wanted to say. Here's what I've been dancing around. I'm like, eventually I'll remember what I wanted to say. It occurred to me while we were talking just now that having Park Forest be what it is became like the novelty best friend. Oh yeah, my best friend's black, and suddenly you're prizing that friend a little more, and I think there are people who, it's that George Costanza thing where he invites the guy over because he needs a black friend. And I thought, for me, the novelty was, no, I grew up in an integrated neighborhood. And I realized in some respects that I was looking back at my past in the same way that really gross people talk about, I got a buddy that's black. It's like,
but I had this whole experience.
Right. And I felt very privileged and special because of it. And that was one of the reasons,
as did I, and
having it be taken
all those
away.
People on Facebook who were so offended by Greg Davis.
Right. Exactly. I think that's what it is. It is that novelty of, oh no, I'm above all of this because I had this special experience.
I'll be honest, I was stunned by all the rioting and the post George Floyd stuff, but there's a lot of people who called me out on Facebook and didn't know anything about how I grew up. And on the one hand, I was kind of self-righteous, but on the other hand, they didn't know anything about me. And they were saying things like, the extreme version was, you have no business even interacting with black people. I was like, what? These crazy stuff. But you know what? One thing also that you just brought up for me when you said that was, this is a white film in the end. This is a film made by white people,
and we
saw and what we got from the people we talked to.
Exactly, but it's important that you get this on film. We tried so hard not to do that. Yeah. We had so many conversations about, and our faces will never be in this. Our voices will never be in this. And at first we were like, we only want to interview black people. Yep. This is a black film, and we're not interested in other people's experience. And it became impossible from day one.
Yes, and we brought in black people to be on our film team,
right?
But it was still you and I in charge, and now it's me.
Yeah, and it's right. So it is a white film, and it is a fascinating phenomenon still. And I think I think in the end, it's the same phenomenon that I was talking about and that we were arguing about from the beginning. Is that phenomenon of, I remember something and it was fucking amazing, and I want to tell people about it, and it sucks a little bit that it doesn't live up to my memory. And that is so hard, because that's our identities, especially, again, for the people that are on the list that feel good about their experience. That's the one thing that shocked me. That's who they are.
One other thing that I learned, and I think I was starting to learn this when you were still working, I might have said it when you were still working with us, is I've discovered that every individual person has their own racial identity and their own relationship with race. Yeah. And so I think that I understand a black perspective, but then there's black people who have a completely different, point of view. So,
although I respect that. That's honest. That 60-year-old white guy is saying, turns out racism's more complex than I thought.
Well, and here's the
but
flip
it's
side.
so important. It is such a moment.
So to turn that
Yeah.
realization upside down, I invited an old college or classmate to come work on the film in the last few years.
Yeah.
And one of the first things I said to him was, I realized that I don't have any idea what it's like to be your skin to be brown or dark,
Yeah.
And he said to me, "That's the most racist thing you've ever said." So I'm like, "What the hell?"
Yeah. You know what? I do want to also tell you, there was that moment when it became clear to me. I was like, I feel like the story, where we are in the story for our experience and the people that we interviewed, we were in a story of white flight that we didn't know was going on. And that's inevitably what it became.
That's what Ryan Causey brought up.
Yeah.
It was the longest white flight in history, but it was.
Because I think the people that stayed really wanted to stay for reasons that they felt were important in terms of what they told their children, how they wanted their lives to be. And I think it would be great if more people felt that way. But I think what often happens, the Cicero white flight story is, oh my gosh, look what this neighborhood is becoming, or Austin, look what this neighborhood is becoming. We got to get out of here. Yeah. And I don't think it happened that same way. I think that there was like the town's identity is tied in an integration. So it happened slower, but I think what we couldn't see, and I think that was the point at which we split, which you were like, well, you know what? The kids were going through something that their parents were going through, and it was really great. And I was like, I was kind of so disgusted by the story of white flight that I started to see, or not disgusted, I started to see it as, this is the same old damn story in so many towns. Just in Chicago, I can think of 5 towns that went through something like this, although it wasn't met with the resistance of those 70s optimists who wanted to say, no, let's have this be something really good, And I think that's the difference in this story.
Park Forest, remarkably, is still 20 to 25% white, depending on which statistics you believe in.
Yeah.
But and I've been surprised to find the number of white people that I went to high school with who still live there.
Yeah.
So it's Myrtle Martin said in her interview, I don't remember, it's a black town now.
Yep.
It's a black majority town, but so
that was the one thing I kept saying to you, though. I'm like, why is it that it's a black town now, even though it's integrated at a greater rate than it was when we went to school?
Yes. And, it was integrated about the same.
Right. It was like 20%.
Yes.
And that was disabusing thinking about it in those terms. Because I was like, yeah, it's integrated now, but we're thinking of it as past integration.
Right.
And that made me feel kind of gross again.
Yeah.
It's like,
yet that's how the world regards it.
Yeah. So what does that mean? What does that mean to you?
I don't know. If I can wrap my head around the idea that it's still largely integrated, then it's kind of the same. The economics thing is still, it was a huge part of it. Moderate housing all the way across. And there were a lot of people who left because they wanted better houses.
Yeah,
black and white people.
Yeah, that's true. But as John Moore said, the lack of housing and the housing price has gone down because it's a bedroom community. They're paying for everything, and the housing prices are going down. So it's destroying the tax base, and that's a racial issue. And that's a sad, it's like, wow, it's exactly integrated the same way it was, except it's a mirror of itself.
Yet it's complicated too, though, because the Park Forest tax base was so not well prepared. The big commercial base.
Yeah. It certainly wasn't prepared for what happened today and everything.
Yeah.
I think you and I thought that we used to say that the big events that happened that put this town on a bad path was the kid get killed in 1984. It was 3 things. That Sun-Times put on its cover, Section 8 housing was being steered toward Park Forest, which made it seem in the eyes of everybody that saw that headline in the newspaper boxes, oh, Park Forest is a slum where they send poor people to live. And
I don't know if this was part of that. There were 2 more murders later in the 80s.
Yeah. I think those, you know, you don't recover.
Yeah.
You know, or at least they wouldn't recover.
But it took a long time, man. It was still majority white in 2000. So it's a weird story.
Yeah,
It
it is. But it's a good story. And it's, you know, it's a good story. It's a shame we couldn't agree on how to tell it.